I'd like to welcome to the program today Stephen Payson, who received his doctorate in economics from Columbia University in 1991. He's been a professional economist and adjunct professor for about 32 years. His latest book, which we'll be talking about today, is How Economics Professors Can Stop Failing Us, The Discipline at a Crossroads. This is a very, very interesting topic to me, Stephen, as someone who studied economics at both the undergraduate and graduate level, regularly interviews economists, regularly debates economics with both economists and non-economists. What would you assess as the real crisis of economic professorship that's going on right now?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think uh, first of all, before I say what the crisis is, I just want to say that there's a lot of professors who are doing very good work.
Of course,
So I don't want it to seem like I'm condemning all professors or anything like that.
certainly.
But so having said that, I think there is a crisis. It's pretty much a crisis where the profession is too much interested and too engaged and in a way too trapped by its own games that it plays internally
Hmm.
for its career promotion and its publications and the kind of work that a lot of academic economists do is really serving a sort of game that doesn't produce much for society.
Give us an example of that.
And
In other words, what's something that economists, economics professors might put time into that you believe doesn't serve society? Is it the publishing of theoretical economics articles, or what is it?
Right, I think a lot of it is a focus too much on theory and too much impressing people, other economists, theoretical economists in the same club. So, for example, I had studied for a couple decades technological change and trying to predict patterns of technological change. And it was a very interdisciplinary approach, which some other economists also take. But in my view, the literature on the effects of technological change have been dominated much more by theory, where the theory just builds up on highly mathematical constructs based on very, very strong assumptions, and it kinds of produces more and more publications without shedding light on what's truly going on in technological change.
So let me tell you one of the concerns I have with the field of economics, at least in most of American colleges and universities. And you tell me, number one, if you agree or disagree that this is an issue, and ideally whether you think it's connected to what you just outlined, which is I am very concerned about the percentage of the time that is spent teaching sort of rational actor traditional economics relative to the amount of time that's spent really exploring the last 20 years of behavioral economics and sort of the way that a lot of these concepts actually manifest in the real world. Do you agree that that's a problem? And is that related to the problem you've identified?
Yes, it is. I agree it's a problem, and I agree that it's related. I think what's happened in economics, and part of it might be attributable to work by Gary Becker and others, has been this kind of option that we don't have to truly understand human behavior if we have an interesting model that we can study, and we can study the mathematical properties of that model and impress each other with what we've discovered in our mathematical models. So it's sort of like understanding human behavior is an option, and there's a substitute for it, which is, more high-powered theory where we just, rediscover essentially our assumptions about it. And it's amazing how this has affected so many things, because it also affects economic policy, because then, if you have an economic problem and we're trying to solve it, and a distinguished professor has a certain theory based primarily on assumptions, but then can say, I published a proof that this is the best solution, It's real. The profession doesn't have a capability to really challenge that. So there isn't a strong enough leadership to say, wait a minute, how much of these assumptions are grounded in reality? You know, if the assumptions are published in an impressive journal, then that sort of like automatically elevates it to acceptance.
Do you believe that sort of classical rational actor economics is still a good basis for students of economics to first sort of understand if humans were totally rational, if we had completely free markets, if the laws of supply and demand applied 100% in the real world, here's sort of how it would work, and then later be introduced to, for example, the teachings of behavioral economics or the limits of capitalism or whatever else. Is that still the right order in your mind, or would you teach economics in a different order?
Um, I think it the simple basis of the sort of neoclassical framework could still be taught at the very first level
Hmm.
of explaining what supply and demand is and maximizing utility and what determines prices and everything else. So I think there's still that basic, element. But then, rather than, but then soon thereafter, we've got to introduce all the caveats and all the other things that determine human behavior before going, before piling it higher and deeper into our own reality.
I think that
So,
maybe I don't know if
yeah,
you can speak to this, but I think that so my undergraduate economics degree is from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts, and I
uh-huh,
believe that that was a unique department insofar as I had Marxist economist Richard Wolff teaching my introduction to macroeconomics, a 100 level class as a first year student. And then very quickly, I was able to move into, the late Steve Resnick's class on Marxian economics and other classes that explored sort of the limits of neoclassical economics. Was that relatively unusual as far as economics departments go?
I think so. I think that is very unusual. I'm aware of certain, departments like that, and some still exist, but that is unusual. But we have to also be cautious because uh, I think when we're talking about, I guess what we're saying here is we're talking about pluralism in economics and different, views other than sort of the neoclassical framework. One thing that I talk about in my book is um, we can get too caught up in those scholarly discussions and like you could say, well, this kind of helps round out economics so that we understand things better. That's true, but then you could also, create a lot of other distortions because you can have scholars in the room talking about, what did Marx mean when he said this, that, and the other thing, and that wouldn't be very productive for economics today either. So just a general, challenging the simplicity of the neoclassical framework is very good, and basic principles like labor exploitation and those kind of things are good too. But if we get too much into the weeds, into scholarly discussions, then a lot of professors in those subfields tend to have the same problem of trying to impress each other, not necessarily with mathematics, but with their quotations of what scholars had written hundreds of years ago, that kind of thing.
Do you think
Um,
that, again, anecdotally, when I was at the University of Massachusetts, economics was not part of the business school. It was part of social sciences or humanities, call it what you want. It has since been moved into the business school, and this is something that we're actually seeing around the country, that increasingly economics is being put under the umbrella of learning about business. Is that something that makes sense, or should we be concerned about that?
I would be concerned about that. You have to take these things into context. So if it's a small university, they simply may not have an economics department,
Right.
and they may teach a few economics classes, and it would go under the business school. But like when I studied economics at Columbia, it was in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. It was
Exactly.
separate from the business school. And I think that's right because I think economics, really should be seen as a science, as a social science, with applications to business, but also applications to public policy, applications to international trade, that kind of thing.
How concerned are you about sort of pop economics, I guess, for lack of a better term, that's leading to just a lot of people believing that they understand economics in a way that they can accurately assess what sort of public and government policies would be beneficial to the economy? Is that having a real impact on government, or is that something that's just sort of going on in media and is not impacting public policy?
I think it's always impacted public policy, and it's gotten worse in some ways because what's happened, and maybe there might be some trends, to improve things recently, but it's hard to say. But what's happened is that models have become so complicated and so dependent on very specific assumptions that you can approach them with alternative sets of assumptions that essentially rediscover those assumptions and make very different conclusions. So, if you want a model that says that if we reduce the tax rate, the economy will grow, you can produce a model like that. If you want a model that says the opposite, you can produce a model like that. And the devil is in the details of the assumptions and the math and that kind of thing, and even the way data are processed and measured and interpreted. So what that has meant for public policy is that there's a lot of distrust, and perhaps rightfully so, in the applications of economic models in general. And so that really limits our ability to use economics, because if we don't trust economics, then we're just basing policies on gut instinct or what we really want to believe. If we don't like taxes, we'll think that taxes are bad. If we want public programs, we think taxes is good to finance the programs. And so it's kind of like economics has become so theoretical that it's created a disbelief in economics, and so a lot of public leaders simply don't believe economics.
We've been speaking with
Ultimately.
Stephen Payson. The book is How Economics Professors Can Stop Failing Us, the Discipline at a Crossroads. Very interesting topic, and I find it particularly important right now. Stephen, thanks so much for talking to us about this.
Can I just, if you don't mind, I just want to show this because the book is on sale half price,
Oh, sure.
and there's a coupon at this website. So
Absolutely
anybody can
fantastic.
see it.
airleap.org/p.pdf for our radio and podcast audience. Stephen, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, David. Thank you very much.